Very good morning to all of you. I would like to start by thanking the International Recovery Platform, Hyogo Prefecture, and Cabinet Office for inviting me and the National Disaster Management Authority of Government of India to be here and share our thoughts at this very important forum. It's quite symbolic that we are meeting here in Kobe to discuss the topic of disaster-resilient infrastructure. Before disasters, after a disaster, there couldn't be a better place to have this conversation. Just a few days ago, we marked the 25th anniversary of the Hanshin Awaji earthquake. Earlier speakers talked about Hanshin Awaji earthquake being a tipping point in Japan. I would reckon to say that it was a tipping point for the whole world. I think in many ways it changed the global discourse on disaster risk management. It led to the formation of Hyogo Framework for Action and subsequently Sendai Framework for Action. Also, just last year in the nearby city of Osaka, the G20 leaders met and committed themselves to working on quality infrastructure, principles of quality infrastructure. The World Bank around that time released a seminal report, Lifelines report, on infrastructure. So it's really wonderful that we are having this conversation here. Over the last few years, 5 or 6 years, the topic, the notion of focusing on infrastructure, large physical infrastructure, and making it disaster and climate resilient has become very, very topical. A number of new initiatives have come up. I just mentioned the World Bank's Lifelines report. The Global Commission on Adaptation also talked about how to make infrastructure climate resilient in the face of emerging trends, more frequent and intense hydrometeorological events. There is the initiative that Government of India, the UNDRR, World Bank, and several other partners are working on to develop a coalition for disaster-resilient infrastructure, where Japan is one of the founding members. So the conversation on the topic is really gathering a lot of steam. But I would like to just highlight, before I launch into some of the global trends and what really needs to happen, is that it's not something very new in many ways, because humanity has been building infrastructure for millennia and doing a pretty good job of it, actually. So I just want to show you some slides going back in time. This is more than 5,000 years old, Indus Valley civilization, water infrastructure. The drainage systems in the urban areas of Indus Valley civilization cities, remarkable in their capability to manage urban floods, to manage extreme weather events, extreme rainfall events. And it's not just in South Asia or India. Even in Europe, there is this dam which was built in nearly 2,000 years ago, and it is still functional. So we are, as humanity, we are capable of building infrastructure which can really serve us for a very, very long time. This is a Roman aqueduct, which is in Spain. This was built 2,000 years ago, 1st century AD, and it was functional till 100 years ago. So we built something which served us for nearly 2,000 years. Really quite remarkable. This is a city in India, Udaipur, where some 400 years ago, 500 years ago, an interconnected system of lakes, artificial lakes, was built to manage the extremes of water availability, too much water or too little water. And it is still functional. It still works. It still serves a growing population. This is, one of the snapshots of that area. This is the system. This is the interconnection between lakes. There is a somewhat modest infrastructure of 108 ponds in Karnataka in India, interconnected. It is a arid to semi-arid area, and it really works even now. So The point I'm trying to make is that as humanity, we are quite capable of thinking long-term, committing to resilience for the long term, and building infrastructure that has served generations. But something is changing now, and this is from a couple of years ago, an article in New York Times talking about Jakarta, one of the capital cities in Asia, which is having huge problems because of sea level rise, because of overexploitation of groundwater, and it is being called one of the fastest sinking city. And I don't want to just mention the example of Jakarta. This is the kind of challenge many of our cities and the infrastructure in our cities is facing right now. So in this rapidly changing infrastructure scenario, what are the key drivers of this transition in infrastructure systems? I would reckon that we have 5 major drivers of the change that is happening rapidly in the global infrastructure scenario. And the first one is really urbanization. Some 10 years ago, for the first time in the human history, more people started to live in urban areas than in rural areas. And that is set to continue. In another 30 years, 3/4 of the world's population will live in urban areas. And that really creates unique conditions. It creates opportunities for creating infrastructure, and make the most of economies of scale. But it also poses unique challenges in terms of the kind of vulnerabilities, the kinds of risks you build. I would like to show some examples. One example from India. This is Chennai, and see how the whole landscape is changing as a result of urbanization. All that was blue has turned red. All the facility that we had in terms of lakes, natural water bodies is all being built upon. And the drainage capacity that we are losing, the capacity to hold water in extreme rainfall events that we are losing, is not being compensated enough by the systems that we are developing. This is an example also from Chennai. This is an airport, and this is Adyar River. When the city grows, more people want to come in and out. There is a need to expand the airport, the runways. You need to have larger planes landing. So this is what happens. So this is what happened in Chennai, where the runway was extended. It was built. There is a bridge built over the river, Adyar River, and extended this thing. And this was one of the major reasons for the big flood that happened in 2015, November, December. And I don't have an image of it. You will actually see planes floating in water at the airport as if they are not aeroplanes, they are seaplanes. So really catastrophic impact of, this is not just risk to infrastructure, but also risk from infrastructure that emerges from this. So of course, there are now proposals to retrofit this and somehow, come up with heavy infrastructure to protect the airport from excess water. So the other driver, the second driver of infrastructure systems, is the interdependency. Much greater interdependence of different infrastructures now than ever before. In May last year, we had a big cyclone in Odisha, one of the coastal states of India. And it was really remarkable how one impact in one infrastructure sector affected the other. Just to give you an example, when electricity goes off, your telecommunications goes off, because the telecom systems, the telecom towers have a power backup of only 8 hours. If you can't restore electricity in 8 hours, then telecom goes down. When telecom goes down, the ATM machines stop to work. When ATM machines stop to work, people don't have access to cash. When people don't have access to cash, they can't buy basic facilities. So the knock-on effect really ripple, And some of these interdependencies are very difficult to model. This is a 21st century challenge. how do we anticipate these interdependencies and begin to look at infrastructure not as transport, telecommunication, power, and so on. We have to really look at it in an interconnected way. This is, just a schematic of how everything is connected to everything, and that really adds a completely different scale, a different order of magnitude of complexity. This is an example from Italy. One small damage in the power system collapsed the grid very widely. The third driver of the transition in infrastructure is the scale. The World Bank report a few years ago said that what we will build in the next 20 years will be more than what we've built in the last 200 years. You could even say that we will build more than what we have built in 2,000 years. The speed at which we are building is really remarkable, and that is going to change the landscape of our countries in very, very fundamental ways. So there is this graph of global current trend in investments in infrastructure, and there is a shortfall. There is an estimate that between 2016 and 2040, the world will spend something like $94 trillion in developing new infrastructure. There's a very strong economic case for it. This is absolutely fundamental for lifting people out of poverty. This is absolutely fundamental for sustainable development, economic prosperity, and creating better life for our people. So it has to happen. There is a very strong case for big investment in infrastructure, but how do we manage this growth in a way that we build resilience and not risk? I just want to give Indian example. This is the kind of growth we are seeing in different infrastructure sectors. The big one, of course, is the energy infrastructure, followed by transport. And you see how this whole, the rapid increase that is happening. And India is not alone. This is something that we are going to see worldwide. Even developed countries that have large infrastructure already in place are entering a regime where they need to replace the infrastructure because their infrastructure is completing its life cycle. So we are dealing with scale of building that we haven't seen before in the human history. This is just an example of where the metro lines are. The whole country is dotted with metro projects. If I use 2016 as the baseline, the length of metro lines in India will be 6 times of what it was in 2025. In just 10 years, it will be 6 times. Same is the case with highways and electricity, very, very rapid growth. So how do we deal with this? So this is another major driver of infrastructure transition, the issue of scale. Then I want to point to the fact that the way infrastructure building used to happen 20 years ago in most countries is not how it is happening now. There are many more new players. There is much greater private investment, not just in building infrastructure, but also in operating and maintaining this, which brings together a different kind of complexity in how we build, maintain, and operate infrastructure. So we have to go out of the traditional areas of engagement, the traditional constituencies we engage with, to a whole new set. What is the kind of regulatory framework we develop? What is the kind of governance mechanism we develop that all the players who are involved in the infrastructure growth story have an incentive for focusing on building resilience? Then there is a big issue of decarbonization. We have had the 1.5 degree centigrade report, and there is a greater case for there is a stronger and stronger case for how new infrastructure can be more carbon efficient, low carbon or carbon neutral, but all of that will have implications for how we build infrastructure in terms of its resilience. I'll just give you 2 examples. In India, in south of India, there is an airport called Kochi. Till a few years ago, the Kochi airport used to take pride in the fact that it was a 100% carbon neutral airport. All of its electricity, all of its power requirements were met with from solar power. They had a big solar power farm in at the airport. But in 2018 August, there were big floods and all of the solar panels were underwater. For 3 weeks, the airport was not operational. So how do we make sure that these new systems, this new infrastructure of renewable energy, for example, is made resilient from disasters? There is also the issue of stranded assets. So if we are going to begin to decommission coal plants in 10, 15, 20 years, or even sooner, what are we going to do with that? If the telecom system in the world is going to transition from 4G to 5G, what does it mean for the infrastructure that we already have? So we have to think about it from multiple angles, and this whole fifth angle of decarbonization, how new infrastructure contributes to climate change mitigation efforts, and what does it mean for how we work towards building this resilience is an important point as well. Now, if we don't invest in making infrastructure resilient, there are huge costs to it. I would just like to highlight some examples of how infrastructure losses stack up as proportion of total public losses in disasters. Just a few examples from the last 10 years or so. So this is Indonesia, Aceh, 2004 tsunami, the Boxing Day tsunami, 26 December 2004. 56% of total public sector losses were related to infrastructure. Samoa, 2012, 2/3 of the total public losses were related to physical infrastructure. And mind you, I'm just talking about direct losses. I'm not talking about the knock-on effect in terms of impact on livelihoods, impact on small and medium enterprises, disruption in critical facilities such as hospitals. It's just direct impacts. Nepal, a large part of the Nepal affected by 2015 actually had infrastructure deficits. So even in a country where infrastructure is said to be inadequate, the proportion of losses attributed to infrastructure is enormous. Fiji, Cyclone Winston in 2016, nearly half the losses were related to infrastructure. And this is, about 10 events, and you can see the proportion of losses to infrastructure are very high. And it is not just the catastrophic impact when the infrastructure collapses completely. Even in small and medium-scale disasters, when there's a partial loss of functionality of infrastructure, this is a rather dramatic image of, half a bridge collapsing. When half a bridge collapses, maybe it doesn't make a global news, but there are these people stranded here. It affects transport, it affects connectivity, it affects livelihood, it affects, if in such a situation another event happens, makes people more vulnerable in terms of your capability to evacuate them and so on. So these events, which are small and medium scale events, which degrade infrastructure or lead to partial loss of functionality of infrastructure, also have a huge impact. And my hypothesis would be that the cumulative impact of these events and the indirect impact of loss of functionality of infrastructure would be extremely high, would be actually close to what we see in the big, rather impressive catastrophic impact on infrastructure. So what can be done? I would like to highlight 3 things, 3 approaches and 4 thematic areas of work to actually work towards making our infrastructure more resilient. The first is in developing a risk management framework for infrastructure development, we now have to look at more and more, we have to take a territorial approach, we have to take a regional planning approach. The planners really have to be at the center stage of planning resilience in infrastructure systems. We have to look at interdependencies, we have to look at interconnections between different infrastructure across geographies. So it was very interesting when the Vice Governor talked about the work that is being done here, where a number of cities in this region are working together in an integrated fashion to look at resilience at scale, at a regional scale, and not just looking at the level of individual assets. The second is we really have to begin to talk about systems of systems. This is an example from UK's Infrastructure Commission, where basically we begin to look at not just individual infrastructure, but interconnections between infrastructure. The third point that I want to make, the third principle, is that more infrastructure is not necessarily always better. You know, we also have to look at infrastructure in terms of nature-based solutions, the ecological infrastructure. This is an example from Calcutta in India, where the wetlands in eastern Calcutta provide a natural service for managing extremes of availability of water. So there are many such systems. You know, mangroves are an example, wetlands are another example, where there is ecological infrastructure in place which is providing services to humanity. We must take note of those things and really preserve those rather than, you know, destructing them and then trying to compensate for this. So nature-based solutions for building resilience is an important area. So these three things, focus on nature-based solutions, a systems approach, and a territorial approach, is some of the basic principles of what we need to do. Then 4 areas of work. We need to have a much better framework for assessing disaster risk. Disaster risk not just to infrastructure, but also from infrastructure. Disaster risk not just as it is now, but also as it would be in the future, both in the view of a changing climate, but also changing society, changing built environment. So we have to have a much more dynamic view of risk to infrastructure and much better systems for assessing infrastructure risk, disaster risk to infrastructure. We have to go beyond assets to looking at systems. Then a whole area of work on standards and regulation. On standards and regulation, I have to say that there are a number of new infrastructure sectors or relatively new infrastructure sectors, such as telecommunications. In telecommunications, mobile telephony is 30 to 40 years old, or maybe less. We have more experience in water, power, irrigation, and so on. But in these new infrastructure sectors, the standard setting in many countries is catching up with the growth. So we build first and think about standards later. Or we build using, you know, imported standards from other places. How do we set systems at the national level to continually evolve standards in line with our understanding of risk? The third area is mechanisms of financing. I earlier said that increasingly there is much greater private investment in infrastructure development. How do we set up financing mechanisms for infrastructure so that there is incentive for resilience? What do we do in a case where the builder of infrastructure is different from maintainer and operator of infrastructure? So you build infrastructure and you build risk into it, but then you pass it on to somebody else who's going to operate and maintain it. How do we come up with a system where financing of infrastructure really incentivizes resilience as opposed to risk? Then finally, the main topic of today and the Recovery Forum, how do we use recovery as an opportunity for building back better in infrastructure sectors. We heard the example of Kobe earthquake and how quickly the infrastructure functionality was restored. There is the example of Odisha cyclone in 2019 May in India, where we did a remarkable job of saving lives. We moved something like 1.2 million people to safety. But in terms of loss to infrastructure, the power sector, to restore electricity, it took us 45 days in some areas. There are some townships where the distribution system was done using underground cabling. There, the power came back up and running in 24 hours. So if anybody wanted a cost-benefit analysis of a case for investing in resilience, the proof is available now. So two such cyclones, and that extra investment will pay for itself. But at the same time, once a disaster occurs, the demand from the affected people is to quick restoration of infrastructure, not necessarily for building back better. People want electricity day after tomorrow. They are not going to wait for 45 days for you to build it back better. So how do we reconcile the needs of quick recovery and more resilient recovery? So this is a challenge we have to focus our minds around and address. It's also a commitment. At least 5 of the SDGs, SDG 9 is specifically on infrastructure, but 4 others speak directly to infrastructure development. So if we do not do a good job of resilient infrastructure, we will not be able to achieve these SDGs. But all the SDGs actually have some infrastructure linkage. So it is absolutely important that we focus on this for achieving the commitments that we've made. In the Sendai framework as well, one of the 4 risk reduction targets is exclusively focused on reducing damage to critical infrastructure. And we will measure our progress not on the basis of how many guidelines we produced, how many workshops we did, how many people we trained, but what are we getting in terms of the real outcomes in terms of reducing losses to infrastructure. So the choice is really ours. We can either lock in risk or resilience. In my slide, I'm trying to fade out risk so that we can reduce risk and build resilience. Thank you very much.